Surfer vanished in 2003. Wave Rider. Mystery. Chapter 1. The Morning Glass. The first light crept over the Pacific, turning the surface into a sheet of glass that caught every hint of color from the waking sky. Offshore, the long lines of swell marched in from somewhere far beyond the horizon, wrapping around the rocky point and standing up into clean, hollow right-handers that peeled along the sandbank. Snapper rocks sat at the head of what surfers called the superbank, a long, engineered sandbar that linked the point through Rainbow Bay and down towards Kira, creating some of the longest and most coveted rides on the Gold Coast. On a day like this, with a solid cyclone swell and light offshore wind, it was the sort of wave that could define a career, or destroy a board. Ethan Cole sat on the tailgate of his old van in the dim parking lot, fingers wrapped around a chipped blue mug of instant coffee that had gone lukewarm without him noticing. The air still held the chill of the night, but under his thin hoodie his skin hummed with nervous heat. The rumble of the ocean below the bluff was deeper than usual, a constant muscular sound that you felt in your ribs more than heard with your ears. He glanced at his watch out of habit, then stopped himself. A few months earlier, his coach had smacked his wrist lightly and told him to stop timing everything and start feeling it instead. Out here, dawn was measured in shades of light, in the way seabirds changed their calls, in the number of guys already bobbing in the takeoff zone. There were not many yet. He stretched his neck, rolled his shoulders, and looked down the line. Even from the car park, in that in-between light, he could see the sets bending around the black teeth of rock. White spray feathered off the backs of the waves as they detonated over shallow sand, sending lines of foam racing across the bay. The rhythm of it snagged at him, like a tide tugging at a mooring rope. Big, but not too big. Heavy, but clean. A day for the ones who really wanted it. Ethan slid the mug under the front seat and reached for his board. The 6-foot, 3-inch white shortboard had a faint yellowing along the stringer from years of sun, but the rails were sharp and the bottom clean. Wax bumps ran under his fingertips like braille. He checked the leash plug out of reflex and gave the cord a sharp tug. The board had been with him through more contests than he could count, including the trial events that had finally pushed him into the professional rankings. It was not his newest stick, not the one plastered with the latest sponsor logos, but it was the one that felt like part of his body. He had won heats on this board. He had nearly drowned on this board. It was a ledger of everything the ocean had ever given and taken from him. Footsteps scraped on the gravel behind him. "Thought you would be here," a voice said, half amused, half resigned. "Could hear your clapped-out engine from up the street, mate." Ethan turned, a smile already forming, then cooled a notch when he saw who it was. Liam Hart walked out of the shadows between the parked cars, a board bag slung under one arm. He wore a faded hoodie from a big surf brand, the kind you only got if you were on good terms with their team manager. His blonde hair was cropped shorter than most of the local boys, and his eyes were pale and sharp even in the low light. "Morning," Ethan said carefully. He tried to keep his tone neutral. Easy. They had been like that once, before points and prize money and heat draws had turned childhood surf battles into something with teeth. "Morning," Liam echoed. His gaze flicked to Ethan's board, then passed him to the water. "You see it out there? Proper cyclone lines." Quick Pro is going to be ridiculous if it stays like this. "The bank is firing," Ethan agreed. "Good practice." "For some of us, yeah," Liam said, the remark wrapped in a thin smile. They had nearly come to blows a week earlier in the competitors' area during a smaller event up the coast. An interference call had gone against Ethan, handing the heat to Liam. Ethan had held his tongue in front of the judge's tower. But everyone in the scaffolding had heard the argument behind the food truck later. Words about cheap tactics and local protection had hung in the air with the smell of frying onions. Now, in the blue-gray chill before sunrise, it was as if that scene were replaying underneath everything they said, an invisible layer of tension. Ethan slid his board out from the van and laid it on the tailgate. He peeled off his hoodie. Revealing a chest already cross-hatched with old reef cuts and wax rash, and stepped into his damp wetsuit. The neoprene clung cold around his legs, then warmed quickly as he pulled it over his hips and torso. "You paddling out now?" Liam asked. "Before it gets packed," Ethan said. "Winds could swing later." Liam nodded. "I will be out, just waiting for Damo and the film crew. They want some early clips if it turns on." Of course they did, Ethan thought. Liam was the new golden boy. The one the industry whispered about as the next world champion if everything broke his way. Sponsors liked someone ruthless, someone who would win even if everyone hated him for it. "You bringing the circus to the point again?" Ethan asked lightly. "They bring themselves," Liam said. "Some of us just know how to use it." Their eyes met for a beat. There it was, naked, between them. Ethan's slow burn rise versus Liam's meteoric push. One of them would be on posters around the world in a few years. The other would be another nearly was who got old too fast. "Have a good one," Ethan said. He picked up his board and walked away before the conversation could sour further. The track down to the water was a twist of sand and rock, between scrubby banksia trees. Seabirds shifted on the cliff edge, unsettled by the first human who dared break the night's monopoly. Ethan's bare feet found familiar footholds. his fingers brushing the rough stone as if greeting an old friend. When he reached the little flat shelf above the jumping-off point, he paused. The sea turned from reflective gray to a pulsing deep blue as the light grew. Sets feathered on the outside, each wave taller than the last, tilting and thickening as they wrapped towards the point. He spotted maybe a dozen surfers already strung along the takeoff zone, dark silhouettes rising and falling on the heaving water. Most were locals he recognized by posture alone. A few were blow-ins chasing the swell, their strokes a little too frantic, their positioning slightly off. He watched a set march in. The first wave pitched over the shallowest part of the bank, creating a hollow section that spat a long plume of spray. The rider disappeared deep inside, then re-emerged a long way down the line, tiny against the blue wall. The second wave came in cleaner, a perfect ruler edge line. No one had position for it, and it closed out on the inside with a booming thud that rattled Ethan's bones even up on the rock. The magnitude of it thrilled him. Fear was always somewhere in the background, but it was a familiar kind, part of the chemistry that made his brain light up. He looped the leash around his ankle, cinched the Velcro tight, and waited for a lull. When a brief gap between sets opened like a held breath, he stepped off the rock, slid into the water, and began to paddle. The water was cool against his face, but there was a strange warmth under the surface, a layered feeling as if different currents were slipping past each other. As he stroked out, he felt the pull of the sweep that always ran along the point, a sideways drag that could slide you past the peak and into no man's land if you did not pay attention. Today, it felt stronger. He dug in harder, crossing the foamy inside impacts and aiming for the clearer water beyond. Another surfer, a kid with sun-bleached hair and a nervous look, paddled out just to his left. "Morning, Ethan," the kid called, slightly breathless. "Hey, Tom," Ethan replied, recognizing one of the younger locals. "Watch the sweep today. It is moving." Tom nodded. "Yeah, reckon. Big out there." "You will be fine. Just do not sit too deep first wave." He pushed on, using his experience to cut over the shoulders of breaking waves instead of taking them on the head. His timing was good. Within a few minutes he was sitting just outside the main pack, chest rising and falling, heart beating in time with the heave of the ocean. From here, the coast stretched away in a curve of gold and concrete, high-rises catching the first real light. The car park was a smudge above the point, too far to pick out individual figures. On shore, the city was waking up. Out here, another kind of day was beginning. Ethan shook water from his hair and scanned the horizon. A dark line bulged in the distance, thicker than the last. He shifted a little deeper, angling himself to meet it. He lived for this. For the moment a wall of water became a possibility, then a decision, then something you committed to with your whole body. For a few seconds on the face, everything else fell away. No rankings, no contracts, no rivalry with Liam, no long, anxious nights rehearsing heat strategies in his head. Just the sound of the board vibrating under his feet and the thunder of the lip throwing over him. The first wave of the set reared up, and one of the older locals spun and went, dropping into a heavy, late takeoff. Ethan let it go. Always watch the first one, he reminded himself. Let the ocean show you what it wanted to do. The second wave loomed. Perfect. He paddled hard, chest low, eyes on the slope of water that rose behind him like a moving hillside. Someone inside him shouted his name, but the wind carried it away. He felt the moment the board engaged, the acceleration sudden and smooth. He popped to his feet, low and compact, trimming high on the face. The barrel threw over him, a hollow tunnel of green light and roaring air. Time fractured into flickers, the lip feathering inches from his back, the sand racing under clear water below, his own breath loud in his ears. For a second, he felt untouchable. He came out high. Dropping down with the cascading wall, then carved back up into the lip, sending an arc of spray into the sky. The inside section bent into a shallow drain. He tried to stall for another tube, but the wave outran him, collapsing around his shoulders. The world turned white. He tumbled, weightless, the leash tugging at his ankle like a live wire. For a heartbeat too long, he did not know which way was up. Then his hand found the pressure of the surface and he kicked, lungs burning. He broke through into air, gasping, laughing. It was only when he paddled back out that he realized how far the sweep had dragged him towards the channel. He dug in, angling against the current with long, efficient strokes, feeling the water resist him. As he reached the pack again, he heard another shout behind him. "Cole!" Liam's voice. Ethan looked over his shoulder. Liam was paddling out now, his own board skimming cleanly over the back of a broken wave. Behind him, perched on the rocks, a small crew juggled cameras, tripods, and long lenses, shapes against the sky. Of course, they were filming. Ethan turned away, unwilling to let that fact crawl into his head right now. Another set was starting to pulse on the horizon. He paddled deeper. He never came back. Later, the others would argue about whether they had seen him go for a wave at all. Some swore they had watched him stroke into one of the biggest sets of the morning, stand up, then vanish behind the curtain without ever reappearing down the line. Others insisted they had merely lost track of him in the glare and chaos, that he was there, and then somehow he was not, like a light flicked off in an empty room. All anyone would agree on was that when the sun was properly up and the crowd on the point had tripled, Ethan Cole's board was found floating riderless near the inside section. bobbing in the foam as if it had simply slipped its owner's grasp for a moment and would soon be reclaimed. The leash was intact. There were no bite marks, and Ethan, the boy who had spent his life reading the ocean's moods, was gone. Chapter 2. The Call. The siren cut through the morning traffic like a jagged line, snapping Chloe Cole out of the autopilot that sometimes carried her through the first hours of her paramedic shift. The ambulance weaved between cars along the Gold Coast Highway, lights painting brief flashes of red and blue across windshields and shopfront windows. "Surf Club call," her partner Sam said, eyes on the road. "Possible spinal, surfer dumped on the bank." "Which club?" Chloe asked, though a cold dread was already settling in her stomach. "Coolangatta, near the point. Snapper rocks." She tightened her grip on the radio handset without realizing it. She had been heading that way anyway, mentally planning to swing past the lookout during their first break in calls to check the swell. Ethan had texted her the night before, a short message full of the peculiar shorthand of siblings who had grown up around sirens and salt. "Superbank is on. Dawn patrol. Watch from the car park if you are on shift." She had not replied. She had fallen asleep on the couch, uniform half on, the television muttering to an empty room. "Chloe?" Sam asked. "You with me?" "Yeah," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Sorry, long night." He gave her a brief look, one professional to another. They both knew what it was to drag yourself from one day into the next on too little sleep and too much adrenaline. The ambulance pulled into the car park above the point, tires crunching on gravel. Even from here, Chloe could hear the deeper, heavier roar of the swell. The ocean looked bigger than usual, the lines marching in more organized. More threatening. A lifeguard vehicle was already parked near the track. A small cluster of people stood at the fence, faces turned seaward, expressions tense. "This way," Sam said, grabbing the trauma kit. Chloe slung the collar bag over her shoulder and followed him down the track, feet moving fast but careful over the uneven ground. She had been here more times than she could count, both in uniform and out of it. As kids, she and Ethan had scrambled up and down these rocks with the easy confidence of locals who knew where to put their feet. Later, when she joined the ambulance service and he chased waves around the world, their paths crossed less often here. But the smell of salt and sunscreen and wax always yanked her back to childhood. They reached the small flat ledge above the jump-off point. Lifeguards in yellow and red were clustered around their inflatable rescue boat at the water's edge. Radios pressed to their ears. One of them glanced up at Chloe and Sam, then shook his head slightly. "Not a spinal," he said. "Different situation." "What have you got?" Sam asked. "Missing surfer," the guard replied. "Went out on dawn. Board just came in without him. We have been searching the impact zone and along the sweep line. No sign yet. Chloe's heart lurched. Name? The guard checked his notes. Cole. Ethan Cole. For a second, the world shrank to a thin, high ringing in her ears. She gripped the strap of her bag so hard her knuckles went white. Chloe, Sam said quietly. She swallowed, forced herself to breathe. Protocol pushed up through the panic, a well-worn pathway in her brain. Timeline? She asked, her voice coming out more clipped than usual. Last confirmed sighting about 40 minutes ago, the lifeguard said. Conditions are solid but not insane. Sweep is heavy, though. Could have been pushed towards Greenmount or even further. We have got a jet ski in the water and a chopper on the way. Police been called in too. Standard procedure. Chloe stepped to the edge of the rock and looked down. The water boiled against the base, white and angry. Further out, surfers bobbed like dark punctuation marks on the heaving blue. A rescue ski traced a zigzag path across the channel, the driver scanning the surface. She tried to spot Ethan's style in the lineup. The way he sat, the way he duck dove, the particular way he paddled into waves. When you grew up watching someone in the water, you could pick them out in the worst glare. She saw nothing familiar. Could he have come in somewhere else? She asked. Walked up the beach, lost his board? Leash was still on when we grabbed the board, the guard said. It was just floating, no one near it. Chloe closed her eyes. He is a strong swimmer, she said. He knows this spot. He would not panic if he lost his board. The guard's expression softened. Everyone says that about the ones who get into trouble. Ocean does not care how strong you are, love. She knew that, had seen it too many times. Still, hearing her brother's situation described with the same clinical tone applied to any stranger punched a hole in her composure. A police four-wheel drive crunched into the car park above. Radios crackled. A thin, early rising crowd of spectators collected at the fence, drawn by the sight of the circling rescue boat and the hovering helicopter that had just thundered into view. Chloe's pager vibrated softly at her hip. Another call was coming in across town. Someone else's worst day, overlapping with hers. Go, she told Sam, surprising herself with the calmness in her voice. I will get a ride back with the next crew. Chloe, he began, but she cut him off with a look. Go. They need you. He hesitated, then nodded and jogged back up the path, Kit rattling against his leg. Chloe stayed where she was, eyes locked on the water, listening to the rhythmic thud of her own heart and the relentless roar of the waves. She did not know it yet, but this moment, frozen between hope and dread, would mark the end of one version of her life and the beginning of another. Everything that came after would be organized around this axis. Before Ethan vanished, and after. Chapter 3. The Detective. By late morning, the incident had shifted from a rescue operation to something darker. The language on the radios changed. Lifeguards spoke of recovery rather than search, their voices flattened by the quiet hopelessness that came when minutes stretched into hours with no sign of a head in the whitewater, no arm clutching at the surface. Detective Sergeant Daniel Morgan stood at the edge of the car park, hands on his hips. Tie already loosened against the creeping heat of the day. He had been halfway through his first coffee when the call had come in. Missing surfer, high profile, possible drowning, possible something else. With the swell in the crowd and the cameras now gathering, the bosses wanted someone from the criminal investigation branch on scene early, just in case. Daniel was in his early 40s. With the kind of weathered face that made him look both younger and older, depending on the light. His dark hair was threaded with the first hints of gray at the temples, and there were faint lines around his eyes from years of squinting at crime scenes and witness statements. He had grown up a few suburbs inland, more familiar with the brown river water near his childhood home than the blue expanse of the open sea. Still, years on the Gold Coast had taught him to respect the ocean's moods, even if he did not fully understand the hieroglyphics of swell and sandbanks the surfers spoke. He walked down the track towards the point, ducking past tourists with oversized cameras and local kids craning for a look. A uniformed constable met him halfway. "Morning, Sarge," the young officer said. "Family is here. Sister Chloe Cole. She is a paramedic." "Parents are on their way from New South Wales." Daniel nodded. "Any sign of him?" "Nothing yet," the constable replied. "Lifeguards have been at it for hours. Chopper did a sweep down past Kira and back. They found his board, though." "Where?" The constable pointed towards the rocks. "Inside section, floated in on the foam." Daniel made his way down to the flat ledge where the lifeguards had set up a temporary command spot. The board lay on the rocks. A white shape against the darker stone, water still streaming from its rails. He crouched beside it. No obvious damage. No fin gouges from rock impacts. No ragged bites taken out by something with too many teeth. The leash was still attached to the plug and to the Velcro cuff that had wrapped around Ethan's ankle. "He was attached when it came in?" Daniel asked. "Nah," one of the guards said. "Leash was on the board, but the cuff was undone." "Just floating." Daniel ran a finger along the edge of the cuff. The Velcro still felt strong. It would have taken a deliberate pull to rip it open, or a very specific kind of force at the right angle in heavy water. He had seen drownings before. People slipped under in rips, panicked, or got knocked unconscious by surfboards or boating accidents. In most of those cases, though, there was some trace. A shoe washed in, a towel left on the beach, a timeline that made sense. Here, The absence felt wrong. He straightened and looked around. A paramedic in a green uniform stood slightly apart from the lifeguards, arms folded tightly across her chest, dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her eyes were on the water, but her jaw was clenched in a way that spoke of someone holding themselves together by force. "Chloe Cole?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. She turned, eyes flicking briefly to the badge on his belt, then back to his face. "Yes. I am Detective Sergeant Morgan," he said. "I am very sorry we are meeting under these circumstances." "Has anyone found him?" she asked, skipping the polite formalities. Her voice was steady, but there was a raw edge under it. "Not yet," he said. "The search is still ongoing. At this stage, it is being treated as a missing person in a marine environment. Standard protocol." "Standard protocol," she repeated quietly, as if tasting the words. "You have any idea how many times I have heard that on scenes?" He did, in a way. Protocol was the spine that held their work upright, but it sounded cold to those on the sharp end. "Can you walk me through what you know?" he asked gently. "When did you last have contact with your brother?" She took a slow breath, as if reeling herself back from the edge of the water. "Last night," she said. "He texted. Said the swell was building, that he was going to paddle out at dawn." Asked if I wanted to come watch from the car park if I was on early shift. "Did he mention anyone else he would be meeting?" Daniel asked. "Friends, coach, media?" "He said Liam would probably be out," she replied, the name sour on her tongue. "And some of the usual crew. There is a contest window coming up. They all want clips." "Liam Hart?" Daniel asked. "Yeah." "I have heard the name," he said. "He is the one with the big sponsor deal." "Right? The one the brands are pushing," Chloe said. "Ethan has been catching up. They used to surf together as kids. Now it is complicated." He noted the hesitation. "You came down here as part of your shift?" he asked. "Our first job was a call to the surf club," she said. "They thought it was a spinal at first. By the time we got here, they realized someone was missing. Then I heard the name." Her eyes flicked briefly towards the board lying on the rock, then away. "Do you mind waiting up near the club for a bit?" Daniel asked. "We will have more questions later, but I do not want you standing down here watching the search lines all day. It will do your head in." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Bit late for that," she said. "But yeah, I will go up." As she walked away, shoulders squared in that particular stubborn way of someone refusing to crumble in public, Daniel felt a familiar tug in his chest. It was the same one that had made him step a little closer to families at crash scenes, that had kept him in missing persons longer than most before he moved into homicide. The ocean was a brutal thief because it left so little behind. No weapon, no neat body to examine, often not even a clear crime. Just an absence and 100 what-ifs. He turned his attention back to the water, to the sweep, to the pattern of the waves. Something in his gut whispered that this did not entirely belong to the realm of bad luck. He would not be able to prove why for a long time. Chapter 4. The Rival. The first formal interview with Liam Hart took place that afternoon in a cramped room at the Coolangatta police station, the walls an uninspiring off-white, broken only by a bulletin board with tired safety posters. The fluorescent light hummed with a faint buzz that set Daniel's teeth on edge. Liam sat across the table. Shoulders loose, tanned arms resting on the metal surface, as if he were simply killing time between surf checks. His hoodie had been swapped for a clean sponsor tee, and a faint line of zinc cream still marked the bridge of his nose. Next to him, a sleek-looking man in a navy blazer introduced himself as Liam's manager from one of the larger surf companies. He had the slightly harried air of someone who spent too much time trying to control images and narratives. "Before we start," Daniel said, switching on the recorder, "I want to make it clear that this is a routine interview in relation to a missing person. You are not under arrest. You are free to leave at any time." Liam nodded, jaw working a little. "Can you state your name for the recording, please?" Daniel asked. "Liam Hart," he said, "and your relationship to Ethan Cole." "We grew up surfing together," Liam replied. "We have been on the same qualifying series for a couple of years." "Friends, I guess." "Friends," Daniel repeated, glancing briefly at the file in front of him, where notes about recent arguments were clipped. "Competitive friends," the manager added smoothly. "There is healthy rivalry at that level. Makes for great sport." Daniel ignored him for the moment. "Walk me through your morning," he said to Liam. "From when you arrived at the car park." Liam stared at the tabletop for a second, then began. "I got there just before sunrise," he said. "Had an early call from one of the film guys. Swell was already up. I saw Ethan at his van when I pulled in. We said hi. Nothing heavy." "Did you talk about the swell? The conditions?" Daniel asked. "Yeah," Liam said with a half shrug. "Everyone was frothing. It was pumping. We both knew it was a good chance to get some practice for the event, maybe some clips for the brands." "Any tension in that conversation?" Daniel pressed. "Any argument?" Liam's jaw tightened. "We had a bit of a blow-up at a contest last week. Interference call. But this morning was chill. We both just wanted waves." Daniel registered the small defensive note. "Who paddled out first?" "Ethan did," Liam said. "He always likes to be out early. I waited for the filmer and my coach. We suited up. By the time we hit the water, he was already getting bombs." "Did you see the wave where he went missing?" Daniel asked. "That is the thing," Liam said. frustration creeping into his tone. I did not see anything. One moment he was out there, the next I realized I had not seen him in a while. But it is heavy out there. Lots of people, lots of water moving. You lose track. Daniel had spoken to a dozen surfers already. Some said they had seen Ethan on a big set. Others were hazier, their memories blurred by adrenaline and the hypnotic repetition of paddling, dropping, kicking out. The lifeguards found his board with the leash still attached but the cuff undone, Daniel said. Can you think of a scenario where that would happen by accident? Leashes get ripped off all the time, Liam said quickly. Especially on days like this. The Velcro can fail, or it can catch on the rocks inside and yank open if you are hammered hard enough. He spoke with the easy authority of someone who had spent a lifetime in shifting water. It made sense. And yet, Daniel's fingers still itched with disbelief. You did not have any conflict with him in the water? Daniel asked. No dropping in, no words exchanged? Look, Liam said, leaning forward. Every set there were like 40 blokes paddling for it. People burn each other, shout, whatever. It is crowded. But there was nothing that, nothing crazy. We did not fight. I would not. He stopped, jaw clenching again. You would not what? Daniel prompted. I would not do anything to him, Liam said. He is my mate. Yeah, we are chasing the same dream, but we have been sharing waves since we were kids. I want to beat him in heats, not this. The manager nodded emphatically, as if his client's sincerity could be underlined by body language. Where were you when you realized he was missing? Daniel asked. In the lineup, Liam said. I had just kicked out of a wave down near Rainbow. Paddled back up and heard some of the boys talking about a board coming in without a rider. Then the lifeguard started blowing whistles, asking if anyone had seen Ethan recently. And after that? Daniel asked. We all started scanning, Liam said. Couple of us paddled towards the channel to look. Lifeguards told us to clear the impact zone so they could run the ski safely. I came in, went up to the car park, tried to see if his car was still there. It was. Did you touch his van? Daniel asked. No, Liam said. I just looked. Did not want to mess with anything. The forensic officers would later dust the van for prints and look for anything out of place. They would find nothing that pointed clearly in any direction. Is there anyone who can confirm your movements before and after Ethan disappeared? Daniel asked. The film crew. The manager jumped in. Camera was on him for a lot of the session. There is probably timestamps. Logs. Daniel suppressed a flicker of annoyance. He would talk to them in due time. We will need contact details for everyone who was shooting this morning, he said. And your coach. Anyone who can place you at specific times. You think I had something to do with this, Liam said quietly. I think a young man is missing in dangerous water, Daniel replied. Until we know what happened, we have to consider all possibilities. Including the possibility that this is a tragic accident. You giving us clear information helps us rule things out. Liam's eyes flicked to the recorder, then back to Daniel. I did not touch him, he said. If something took him, it was the ocean, not me. The word something hung between them, pulling other unspoken possibilities in its wake. Sharks, rocks, rips, or things that wore human faces and smiles in the car park. Then turned into something else in the shadows between sets. Chapter 5. Ripple's news of Ethan's disappearance spread along the coast faster than any wave. By midday, surf forums were buzzing, local radio stations carrying live updates from the beach, and a television crew had set up near the car park, their camera pointed at the churning lineup. Professional surfer missing, the headline said. Board recovered, search continues. At the hospital between calls, Chloe watched one of the bulletins on a waiting room screen. The footage showed the helicopter circling low, its rotor wash stippling the water. A lifeguard on a jet ski pointed at something off camera, his expression tight. They cut to a shot of Ethan from a recent contest, smiling as he ran down the beach with his board under his arm. To most viewers, it was just another generic image of a young athlete in his element. To Chloe, it was a dagger. She knew every line of that face. Every scar on those legs. She knew that 10 minutes after that shot, he had sat quietly in the competitor's tent, picking at a blister, more nervous than his casual swagger suggested. She switched the television off. The first days were a blur of waiting rooms, briefings, and phone calls. Their parents arrived the next morning, pale and shell-shocked from the overnight drive. Their mother clutched a plastic crucifix so tightly it had left faint cross-shaped indentations in her palm. Their father swung between brittle optimism and biting anger, demanding to know why the lifeguards had not pulled Ethan out within minutes, why the shark nets and drum lines and years of so-called safety measures had not prevented this. Chloe took time off work and sat with them through meetings with police and surf club officials. She watched as the language shifted, imperceptibly at first. From search and rescue, to search and recovery, then finally to ongoing inquiries into a missing person presumed drowned. The sea gave nothing back. No body washed up down the coast. No wetsuit was found snagged on the shark nets or tangled in the drumlines that lined many of Queensland's popular beaches. The only physical trace was that single intact board. Without a body, there could be no funeral. Just a memorial service on the beach. Friends and family and fellow surfers paddling out to form a floating circle beyond the breakers, tossing flowers into the water. From the shore, It looked almost beautiful, all that color on the shifting blue. For Chloe, it felt like watching her brother dissolve into a ceremony that did not quite know what to do with an absence. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's sponsors put out solemn statements about a life cut short and the inherent risks of a life lived in the ocean. Contest organizers held a minute of silence before the next event. Commentators talked about him in the past tense, weaving a narrative of bravery and passion and tragic loss. On the internet, rumors sprouted. Some said he had been taken by a shark that somehow left no marks on his board, that fragments of wetsuit and flesh had been quietly removed from the water to avoid bad press for the upcoming contest. Others insisted that a freak rogue wave had slammed him into the rocks, that his body was wedged somewhere in a niche below the surface, impossible to see from above. A few whispered darker theories, that there had been a fight in the water, that someone had held him down in the chaos of a set and used the swirling white water as cover, that sponsors, money, or scores had pushed someone to do the unthinkable. Chloe heard every version, sometimes from well-meaning colleagues trying to help her process, sometimes from strangers in bars who recognized her. Last name, and wanted to share what their cousin's mate had told them. She filed them all away, not quite believing, not quite dismissing. Detective Morgan kept in touch. At first, his calls were regular. Updates on the search, on interviews, on forensic checks. They went through Ethan's van, his apartment, his financial records. Nothing suggested he had planned to disappear. No secret tickets, no hidden debts, no goodbye notes written in late-night desperation. His phone had last pinged on a tower near the beach just before dawn. After that, nothing. It had not been found, and the salt water would have killed it quickly anyway. As the weeks turned into months, the updates grew less frequent. Other cases demanded attention. Life, or something like it, dragged everyone forward. For Chloe, time did not move in a straight line anymore. It looped back on itself, replaying that morning in slow motion. Searching for details that might change the outcome if only she could spot them. The way Ethan had laced his shoes, the half-laugh in his last text, the choice of board in the back of his van. She started going down to the point more often, standing on the rocks as swells of varying size and temperament rolled through. She watched other surfers take off on the same peak, make the same lines, kick out in the same channels. None of them vanished. The sea seemed infuriatingly normal. As if it had not eaten her brother whole without explanation. Locals began to talk about Ethan's wave. Some said that on certain mornings, when the light hit the water just so, you could see a darker line in the swell at the spot where he had gone missing, like a scar in the bank. That if you took off on that wave, you felt something tug at your ankle, as if a ghostly hand grabbed your leash. Others claimed that before long sets, they sometimes heard a faint voice in the roar. Calling out a warning or a name. Most dismissed it as surf folklore, the kind of story that grew in any tight community around a loss that made no sense. Chloe did not care about ghosts. She cared about facts, but facts had run aground. All that remained was the feeling that there were pieces missing, and that someone, somewhere, knew more than they were saying. Chapter 6. Undercurrents. Nearly 3 years passed. In that time, Daniel Morgan worked 3 confirmed homicides. One suspicious fire, and a string of burglaries that turned out to be an inside job at a warehouse. He saw enough ugliness on dry land to occupy most of his waking thoughts. Still, every time he drove past the stretch of coast near Snapper Rocks, a small, nagging part of his mind replayed the Ethan Cole file. He had long since moved it from his active caseload to the quiet archive of unresolved cases that sat in a gray cabinet in the corner of his office. Officially, the working theory remained that Ethan had drowned in a high-risk surf environment and that the body had not been recovered, an outcome not unheard of in coastal waters with complex currents. Unofficially, Daniel's instinct kept poking at the gaps. One wet winter afternoon, trapped inside by heavy rain that turned the station windows into a blurred smear, he found himself opening the cabinet and pulling the file out again. The pages smelled faintly of old paper and salt. He flipped through the witness statements, the forensic reports, the search logs. He paused on the section dealing with the film crew. The camera operator, a man named David Ritchie, had provided stills rather than full footage. He had claimed that the tape from that morning had been misplaced in a hard drive failure later that year, lost among countless hours of contest coverage and promotional edits. Daniel had accepted it at the time. Technology failed. People were sloppy with backups. Now, with the benefit of distance, it bothered him. The crew had been paid by sponsors to capture the very best waves ridden by the top surfers in the lead-up to a major event. It was odd that the raw material from that kind of session, with pumping swell and key athletes, would be allowed to vanish without multiple redundant copies. He checked the contact details listed for David. The phone number was out of date. The address had a red line through it with a note. Moved, no forwarding. He stared at the page, a slow, unpleasant realization dawning. For 3 years he had accepted a simple explanation because it fit the larger, tidy narrative of an unlucky drowning. He had not pushed harder on this thread. It sat there, unpulled. Lightning cracked outside, and the office lights flickered. He closed the file, tucked it under his arm, and headed down the hall. Taking a field trip? His colleague, Senior Constable Hughes, called from her desk, eyeing the folder. Just following up on an old friend, Daniel said. She raised an eyebrow. You and your ghosts. He smiled faintly. Someone has to keep them company. He did not find David Ritchie that day, or the next. It took another year, a chance remark from a retired surf photographer at a charity event, and a lot of slow, methodical checking to track the cameraman down. By the time he did, it was too late to ask questions. David had been found dead in his small flat on the southern end of the coast, slumped in a worn-out armchair in front of a flickering television. The coroner's report, which Daniel requested from the records office, listed a suspected heart issue compounded by years of heavy drinking. There were no signs of foul play, no obvious drama, just another lonely death in a city full of them. What caught Daniel's attention was a line in the property inventory. Assorted videotapes and recording equipment transferred to storage. A box number and a storage facility address sat beside the entry. The next step followed like a tide change. Chapter 7. The Tape. The storage facility sat on an industrial backstreet, a row of corrugated metal doors under a sky bleached to uniform gray. Daniel signed the paperwork and followed the attendant down a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of dust and oil. They stopped in front of a unit halfway along. The attendant rolled up the door with a clatter, revealing a cramped space stacked with the remnants of a life spent chasing swells and framing them through a lens. Old camera cases were piled beside cardboard boxes, marked with dates and locations in black marker. A tangle of tripods leaned against a surfboard bag that had seen better days. Posters from past contests curled on the walls, their edges browned. Here is the box you asked about, the attendant said, gesturing to a mid-sized carton near the front. Signed over as part of the estate. No one has claimed it. Daniel crouched and opened the box. Inside, a jumble of mini DV tapes, some in cracked plastic cases, others loose. Each had a label scrawled along its edge. Kira Free Surf 2001. Quick Pro Trials. Snapper Dawn 2003. His heartbeat hitched at that one. He lifted it out carefully. The label was smudged but legible. The spool of tape inside gleamed faintly in the muted light. I will need to sign this out as evidence, Daniel said quietly. The attendant nodded, not particularly interested in the specifics. Back at the station, it took some digging through older equipment storage to find a functioning tape deck and monitor that could handle the format. Technology had moved on, but the past clung stubbornly to its chosen mediums. Daniel set the tape in the machine, closed the tray, and pressed play. For a few seconds, there was only static and the distorted hum of the ocean. Then the image resolved into grainy color. The camera sat on a tripod on the rocks at Snapper. The frame held wide to capture the point, and the line of surfers strung across the takeoff zone. The time code in the corner flickered. Early morning. He watched as wave after wave rolled through. Silhouettes dropped, carved, disappeared into plumes of spray. The surfers' bodies were blurred by distance, faces indistinct. But their movements, their styles, were there for anyone who had watched them enough to recognize. He called Chloe before he had let himself think too hard about the ethics. "This is Morgan," he said when she picked up. "I know your number," she replied. Her voice had gotten a little older in the years since they had first met on the rocks, a little rougher around the edges. "Are you at work?" he asked. "On break," she said. "Why?" "I have something I think you should see," he said. From the morning Ethan disappeared. Silence stretched between them. "Footage?" she asked finally. "Yes. I thought it was lost." "So did I," he said. "It was not." Another pause. Then, "Where?" "Interview room 3, he said. "Half an hour?" She did not say yes, but she turned up 20 minutes later, still in her paramedic greens, a smear of something metallic on her sleeve. They sat side by side in the dim room, the monitor's glow painting their faces. Daniel reset the tape and pressed play again. "This was taken from the rocks?" Chloe asked. "Yes," he said. "Tripod shot." No audio beyond ambient. They watched in silence. The camera operator had done a good job of panning with the sets, tracking the bigger waves and the surfers he clearly considered the main draw. Every so often, the frame would zoom in on a particular ride, the image jumping slightly as the lens moved. Daniel leaned forward unconsciously when a familiar outline appeared. "That is him," Chloe said, her breath hitching. "Ethan." Smaller and less sharp than in her own memories, but unmistakable in the way he carried himself. The way he tucked into a barrel, the timing of his turns. They watched him score a long, clean wave, weaving through sections with ease. He kicked out down the line, then began the long paddle back up the point. The tape tracked other surfers for a while. Liam appeared, brighter in the frame in his sponsor-branded wetsuit, his surfing aggressive, almost violent compared to Ethan's flow. The camera lingered on him longer, zooming in as he launched off a lip and landed in an explosion of whitewater. "Of course they focused on him," Chloe muttered. Daniel said nothing. He had watched enough broadcast sport to know that narratives a crew was paid to capture could affect choices about where to point the lens. Minutes passed. The rhythm of waves and rides and paddles became almost hypnotic. Then something shifted. A bigger set darkened the horizon. The camera zoomed out to capture the whole line. Surfers scratched for position, the pack tightening, alliances and rivalries invisible from shore playing out in inches. The first wave unloaded slightly outside. 2 surfers went, one making it, the other eating it in spectacular fashion. The second wave stood up taller, thicker. The camera held steady. In the midst of the pack, two shapes sat deeper than the others: Ethan and Liam. At this distance, it was hard to see their faces. But their body language told its own story. They were jostling subtly, adjusting, angling for the best spot. "He would not back down," Chloe whispered. "Not on a day like that." The wave steepened. Both began to paddle. From shore, it looked like a standard moment of split-second decision. Who was deeper? Who had priority? Who would commit? In the grainy image, something small but crucial happened. As they stroked, Liam's arm swung wider than necessary. It clipped Ethan's shoulder. Just enough to knock him off the perfect line he had, just enough to make his next stroke less effective. "Did you see that?" Chloe said sharply. "Keep watching," Daniel said quietly, even as his stomach tightened. The board under Liam's chest angled more down the face. He pushed harder. Ethan, stalled half a beat by the contact, found himself just a little too far out, a little too late. Liam popped to his feet, dropping into the wave. Ethan tried to go as well. But his board's nose dug. He pitched forward, tumbling. "Fuck," Chloe breathed. In the chaos of broken water and flying spray, it was hard to track bodies. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching Liam carving down the line, oblivious or indifferent, as the lip detonated behind him. In the whiteout behind, for a fraction of a second, a flailing arm appeared. Something tugged hard on it, jerking it down. Then it was gone. "Again," Chloe said. Her voice sounded far away, thin. Daniel rewound and played that section again. This time he focused not on the wave, but on the small details. As Ethan fell, as the white water surged, there was another shape near him. A third surfer, caught slightly inside, paddling desperately to escape the impact. As the lip hit, confusion reigned. Boards, limbs, leashes tangled. In that brief window, it would have been easy for someone to grab another person's leg under the cover of froth. Easy to hold them just a bit longer than the wave itself would. Too easy. "Pause it," Chloe said, when the arm flashed on screen again. He did. They stared at the frozen image. It was too pixelated to make out expressions, but the position of bodies told an ugly story. "I know you are thinking it," Chloe said. "Say it." "We cannot prove intent from this alone," Daniel replied carefully. "It could be accidental. Crowded takeoff. Interference." "Bad luck." "You do not believe that," she said. He exhaled slowly. "I believe that if someone with enough strength and anger decided to use that chaos to settle a score, they could hold another surfer down and make it look like wipeout turbulence, especially if the person they grabbed trusted them enough to mistake the hand for a rescue at first." Chloe shut her eyes for a second, then opened them again, glassy but furious. "Liam," she said. "Not necessarily," Daniel said. There were at least 3 people in that impact zone. The camera's resolution is not good enough to make positive identifications at that exact frame. We know Liam made the wave. There is another surfer inside. Could be coincidence. Could be something else. "Do you hear yourself?" she said. "We have been told for years it was just the ocean, that nothing human touched him. And now there is this." He had no answer that would make it neat. "This tape was never logged properly," he said instead. "The cameraman told us the footage was lost. That was not true." "Maybe he forgot," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Maybe," Daniel allowed. "Or maybe someone leaned on him not to hand it over. Sponsors have a lot invested in certain names. A whisper about dirty tactics in the water, even if never proved, could damage a brand." Chloe stared at the frozen image. "So what now?" "Now," Daniel said. "We reopen the file." Quietly at first. Talk to the others who were out there. See who stands by their old statements and who suddenly remembers new details. She turned to him. "Will there ever be enough to charge someone?" "I do not know," he said honestly. "But knowing this exists changes the story, even if only for us." "For me," she said. "It changes it for me." He nodded. Outside the small room, the station hummed with its usual low-grade chaos. Phones rang. Typing clattered. Somewhere, a kettle boiled over. Life moved on. Inside, time looped back to a dawn 3 years earlier, holding its breath. Chapter 8. The Pact. Reopening. A cold case without a body and without a clear crime carried its own set of complications. Officially, the file remained labeled as a missing person presumed drowned. Unofficially, within the walls of the CIB, it acquired a new informal tag. Snapper Rocks incident. Suspicious circumstances. Daniel began with the surfers. He brought in those who had been closest to the impact zone during the critical set, one by one, under the guise of a routine review tied to a broader look at coastal safety. He asked them to watch the tape, to walk him through what they remembered. Most squinted at the screen, shook their heads, and stuck to their original versions. "Too much water moving, mate," one said. "It is all foam and noise. You cannot see shit down there." "Felt a board hit me." "Maybe a leg," another offered. "Could have been anyone. I was just trying not to get cleaned up by the next wave." A few, though, faltered. One younger surfer, who had moved on to a trades apprenticeship and mostly surfed on weekends now, stared at the footage with a haunted expression. "I had nightmares for ages after that day," he admitted. "Every time I duck dove in heavy surf, I felt something grabbing my leg." "Because something did?" Daniel asked. The kid's eyes flicked towards the door. "I do not know," he said. "There were so many of us. Arms, boards, leashes. But I remember hearing yelling under the water. Like someone screaming, but it was all bubbles. Does that make sense?" "It does," Daniel said. The kid swallowed. If they wanted to hold him, it would have been easy then. No one would see. No one would know for sure. Did you see who was nearest? Daniel pressed. The kid hesitated. Then shook his head. When Daniel played the section with Liam's interference-like arm swing, reactions varied. Some shrugged it off. Standard hustle, one said. Happens all the time. Everyone is trying to be deepest. Others shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Bit rough, a veteran local commented. You do that at a reef with a smaller pack, and you will get a hiding in the car park afterwards. But here, with the contest coming up, cameras on, people get away with more. No one wants to be the one to call out the golden boy. Daniel asked what everyone knew, but no one had put on the record. Was there bad blood between Liam and Ethan beyond normal competition? The answers painted a picture. There had been rumors of Liam dropping in on Ethan during free surfs, of snide comments in the competitors' area, of subtle sabotages like boards moved from racks or wax switched for something softer before heats. Nothing overt enough to call a crime. Enough to build a steady accumulation of resentment. Ethan was too nice, one friend said. He did not want to rock the boat, did not want to be seen as a whinger. So he laughed it off, but it got to him. Brands were lining up behind Liam, another added. Big money, big marketing. Ethan was more of a quiet grinder. Sponsors love a villain and a hero. They just hoped both would make heats long enough to sell some board shorts. The industry side was harder to crack. Managers and reps spoke in polished phrases about risk management and image control. When asked about the tape, they claimed ignorance. Raw footage is the property of the production company, one said. We do not micromanage every frame. Was anyone ever told not to release footage from that morning? Daniel asked. Why would we do that? The rep replied. It was a tragic incident. The last thing we would want is to exploit it. Daniel had spent long enough around carefully curated. Corporate statements to hear what was left unsaid. He requested internal emails from the production company tied to the days after Ethan's disappearance. But legal hurdles slowed that avenue to a crawl. By the time anything useful trickled in, key staff had moved on, memories and inboxes alike purged. Through it all, Chloe watched the slow grind with a mix of hope and exhaustion. Feels like you are chipping at a cliff face with a teaspoon, she said one night. Sitting across from Daniel at a small cafe near the hospital. The air smelled of coffee and rain. It often does, he admitted. But sometimes a teaspoon is all you get. She smiled weakly. You have some bleak metaphors, you know that? He shrugged. Occupational hazard. They had become, if not exactly friends, then something close to it, bound by a shared obsession with a single missing piece. Their conversations ranged from case updates to small talk about shifts and weather and the strange sociology of surf culture. "You grow up here. You learn early what you can and cannot say," Chloe said. "There is this unspoken rule. What happens in the water stays in the water. You sort it out between yourselves, not by running to the tower or the cops." "That is not unique to surfers," Daniel said. "You see it in a lot of tight communities, footy clubs, work crews." "Families." She nodded. "Difference is the ocean helps. It erases things. You can hold someone under for a few seconds and then blame the set. The sea becomes your accomplice." The words hung between them. "You really think someone did that to Ethan?" she asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel thought of the frozen frame on the tape, the tangled limbs, the arm reaching, the sudden jerk. "I think someone had the opportunity," he said. "Opportunity without accountability is dangerous." "Do you think it was Liam?" she pressed. He met her gaze. "I think Liam benefited more than anyone from Ethan not being in his way." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I can give without proof," he said. "And without proof, I cannot walk into a courtroom. At best, I can make someone live with the knowledge that we see them, even if the law cannot quite catch them." She looked away, blinking hard. "That is not enough," she said. He knew that. He also knew that in most of the unresolved cases that haunted station notice boards, that was all anyone ever got. Chapter 9, Cracks. The breaking point came not from some dramatic confession or a misplaced piece of evidence, but from a small, almost mundane slip. 4 years after Ethan's disappearance, a surf magazine ran a feature on Liam Hart. Now a full-fledged star on the world tour with multiple event wins and a polished media persona. The article framed him as a survivor, someone who had overcome the trauma of losing a close friend in heavy surf to become stronger. The writer had done their homework, digging up old photos and quotes. One paragraph mentioned the early morning sessions before the big event that had been Ethan's last. A pull quote had Liam saying, "I saw him take off on one of the best waves of the day." He was flying. Then he was just gone. When Chloe read it, sitting in the staff lounge during a night shift lull, something in her twisted. She remembered the tape. She remembered Liam dropping in, not Ethan. She remembered the flailing arm behind, not in front. She clipped the article and took it to Daniel. "He is lying," she said, slapping the magazine onto his desk. He read the piece, jaw tightening. "People reshape memories all the time," he said. "Make themselves look better without even realizing." "This is not fuzziness," she said. "This is a rewritten story. He has put Ethan in the hero slot on the wave, put himself in the role of helpless witness, and this is what everyone will read and believe." The picture beside the quote showed Liam in a soft interview light, eyes damp, looking soulful. The caption called him, "Haunted but unbroken. Daniel flipped the magazine shut. "Writers like drama," he said. "But you are right." "This gives us a crack." "How?" she demanded. "We can request a fresh interview," he said. "On the record about this statement. Press him on the discrepancy between his original account, the tape, and this." "Do you think he will tell the truth?" she asked. "Not necessarily," Daniel said. "But people under pressure make mistakes. They over-explain. They contradict themselves. Sometimes that is enough." They called Liam in a week later. He arrived with a different manager this time. Older, smoother. The years had added a few threads of gray to Liam's hair, but his body still looked honed, the product of endless travel and training. In the interview room, Daniel laid the magazine on the table between them, open to the feature. "Nice piece," he said. Liam glanced at it, gave a small, modest shrug. "They like to spin a story." "In this story," Daniel said, tapping the quote, "you say you saw Ethan take off on a wave, that he was riding one of the best sets." "That is not what you told us originally." "I do not remember exactly what I said back then," Liam replied. "It was a long time ago. I was in shock." "Your statement said you did not see the wave in question," Daniel said. "That you were further down the line and only realized he was missing when others started looking. You also said you did not have any significant contact with him in the minutes before." Liam shifted. "Things blur," he said. "You replay it in your head enough." The details shift. The journalist asked for something. I do not know. Something that made sense. "So you made something up," Daniel said. "I did not make it up," Liam protested. "In my head, I can see him on that wave. I know he went for one. Someone of his level, on a day like that, he would not be sitting there letting sets go." "The camera suggests otherwise," Daniel said. He watched the flicker of alarm cross Liam's face. "What camera?" Liam asked too quickly. "We recovered footage from that morning," Daniel said, "from David Ritchie's tapes." Liam's jaw clenched. "I thought that was lost," he said, then flinched slightly at his own words. "You thought it was lost?" Daniel repeated. "How did you know it was lost?" "Everyone said so," Liam replied after a beat. "We were told there was nothing from that session. No one wanted to see." He gestured vaguely. Daniel let the pause stretch. "We have watched that tape," he said finally. "Many times. It shows you and Ethan paddling for the same wave. It shows you dropping in. It shows him pitching over the falls behind you. It also shows some contact before the takeoff." "So what?" Liam snapped. "People bump rails all the time. It was heavy, crowded. I did not knock him off on purpose." "I did not say you did," Daniel said calmly. "But intent aside, it is different from what you have been telling the public, and from what you told us." Liam's shoulders tensed. Why drag this up now? He demanded. He is gone. There is nothing you can do. You are right, Daniel said. There is nothing we can do to bring Ethan back. But there might be something we can do about the truth of that morning. Your truth keeps changing. That worries me. You have nothing, Liam said. No body. No proof. Just some grainy footage from ages ago. Footage that someone told us did not exist, Daniel said. Footage that shows you interfering on a critical wave during a serious swell, in front of a crowd and cameras. If it had surfaced at the time, it might have changed how sponsors and the public saw you, particularly if people linked it, fairly or unfairly, to what happened next. Liam's face flushed. You going to charge me with something? He demanded. Not today, Daniel said. But let me be clear. If I find any indication that there was an agreement to hide or destroy that tape, or to pressure witnesses to soften their accounts, that is a very different matter. That is obstruction. That is perverting the course of justice.